Hi guys, welcome back. In this video I'm going to continue implementing resource on Azure using Terraform. In this video I'm going to implement two options of an Azure Bastion. One is going to use a Linux VM and the other is going to use the platform as a service, the Azure Bastion resource service. Uh, we're going to implement as the option 1 the Azure Bastion hosts Linux VM or this resource, and in the option 2 the Azure Bastion service. In the previous videos I explained all of this resource implementation from C1 to C706, and in this video I'm just focus uh, in the C801 to the C805. You can find the code in the comments of the video. Okay, the first thing is to create the input variables that the Bastion host is going to use. I'm going to refer here the Bastion host as the Linux implementation of the Bastion service. Next, I'm going to create the Linux VM I'm going to use as a Bastion host. It's the same that I just created before in the Linux VM. First, I create the public IP address, then I create the network interface, then I create the Azure Linux VM itself. I'm going to name it like Bastion Host Linux VM. I'm going to put all these arguments inside this VM. The size is going to be this is 1 v2. Okay, so in order to this Bastion Linux VM to connect to the others VM in this virtual network, you need the necessary PIN files and keys to make a successful connection to other VM. So I need to provision this Bastion VM with those files. So here I need to create first a connection block for provision to connect to the Azure VM instance. And then I need to copy the SS key file, the pen file, to this VM. I'm going to do that after the VM is created. So I need to put the depends on argument in a new resource. And finally, I'm going to create a remote execute provisioner that is going to use remote execute provisioner to fix the private key permission on the Bastion host. It's going to use this command in the implementation to provide the necessary permissions. The next file is the Azure Bastion service (TF). It's going to deploy the platform as a service, the Azure Bastion service. Is the option 2 of this implementation. Here, if I browse in the documentation, I can see this example, and here we need to provision the name, the location, the resource group name, and the IP configuration block. This will have the name, the subnet ID, and the public IP of the address. So here it is. We have the subnet. I'm going to call it Bastion Service Subnet. Here we have the public IP, and there I'm going to put those resources in the creation of the Bastion host, the Azure RM Bastion host. As an output, I'm going to put the IP address. I'm going to show the IP address after the creation of this Azure Bastion. Then I'm going to log into my Azure account. I'm going to select the subscription and I'm going to implement the Terraform commands necessary to apply all of this. First, I'm going to implement the Terraform init. It's going to initialize and install all the necessary plugins and providers. Here in the provider, I'm going to add the null provider. I delete all the public IP address of this VM because I'm going to connect only through the private address, through the private IP address. And then I'm going to validate the configuration is success, and then I'm going to apply the configuration. This is going to take a while, so I'm going to pause the video. Okay, after 6 minutes, the 36 resources are applied successfully. You can see here as an output the public IP address of the Bastion host Linux VM and all the resources. To verify this, I'm going to my Azure account. You can see here the resource created. Inside this resource, you can see here all the resources that we create in this lab. Here we have the web Linux VM, the public IP of the Bastion host, and the Bastion Linux VM. You can see that this web Linux VM doesn't have the public IP address, just the private IP address, because we are going to connect to this virtual machine through the Bastion Linux VM. Okay, if you go in this VM to the connect level, you can see here the option of Bastion. You won't be able to connect to this VM to the RDP or SSH because this VM doesn't have the public IP address. So here we're going to use Bastion. I'm going to use the Bastion server that I just implemented. So if you put here the username that we specify and browse for the pen file in your computer with this option, you will be able to connect to the VM. Another tab is open. Click in allow and you will see that you can connect to the web VM. So it's all for now. Thank you very much for watching and see you soon.